Millennia of strife, wars, natural disasters, and unnatural machinations have splintered every major civilization across the so-called Warhammer world. The Dwarf Empire has long since collapsed into semi-independent mountain strongholds, the High Elves face overseas rivals in Athel-Loren and Nagaroth, and this is to say nothing of the Orcs, Goblins, Ogres, Skaven, and other bestial races. Yet, however fractured these societies might be, they all exhibit, to some extent, a sense of ancestral kinship, or maybe even hatred, derived from a shared history, culture, or religion. There is one major exception: humanity. The elves all trace their lineage to the same ancient homeland. Every ogre worships the Great Maw, and every Skaven fears the Great Horned Rat. This, at least in some sense, unites them. But to the merchants of Sigmar's empire, the peasants of Grand Cathay are every bit as alien as the elves are of distant Ulthuan. Conversely, Cathay has no real brotherly affection for the Empire, or Kislev, or Bretonnia. Humanity has no single leader, no binding religion, and no leading nation to which all others pay homage. But in the case of the latter, could we maybe select a favorite candidate? Which single human nation is the paragon amongst its peers? Which is the most capable and the most powerful in the Warhammer world? To answer this question, we first need to properly define how we're measuring power. While it might be tempting to measure this purely by military strength, which nation could dominate the others through conquest, I think this is a narrow view and fails to consider many other expressions of power. Instead, we'll be considering a few factors. Demographics. How large is a nation's population? Geography. What is the extent of its territorial claims and how amenable are they to human settlement? Economy. How advanced are its industries and production? Political system. How are its leaders selected and how effective is their rule? Military. What is the size and capabilities of its armies and allies? And lastly, culture. To what extent does its prevailing beliefs influence the rest of the world? We'll grade each of these as either low, middling, high, or dominant. Now, when looking at the nation-states that demonstrate a large amount of power in these areas, we can narrow our candidates down to 4. The Empire of Man, the Kingdom of Bretonnia, the Tzardom of Kislev, and Grand Cathay. I mean no disrespect to Estalia, Telea, Nippon, or Araby. While they possess significant power in certain areas, I don't believe they show enough potential in every category to warrant inclusion. Though I must confess that might change if more information on these nations becomes available. Likewise, while Nehekara at its peak would certainly be a candidate for the most powerful human nation, today it's nothing but bleached bones and memories. So we'll confine our selections to the era of Karl Franz. Okay, starting with demographics. How do each of our nations compare? As with many of the other categories on our list, it's impossible to get reliable numbers, but I think it's fair to say that Grand Cathay possesses the largest population of any human nation in the known world. If I had to guess, it would be somewhere in the low hundreds of millions. In second place is likely the Empire of Man, which almost certainly is the most urbanized nation. I'd say high tens of millions, possibly exceeding 100 million, but no more than 150. Kislev and Bretonnia are likely tied for third place, both in the low tens of millions. These two nations are much more rural, with a much lower standard of living, and in the case of Kislev, a much greater mortality rate. Given that Cathay probably has a larger population than the rest of our top 4 nations combined, I'm classifying it as dominant, with the Empire at high, and Bretonnia and Kislev at middling. Next up is geography. This might be the most difficult category to get any kind of information on, as maps of the Warhammer world tend to be unreliable. Again, it's tempting to rank Cathay very highly here. It is probably the largest human nation. But its geography is a little underwhelming. Much of it is contaminated by a vast warpstone desert, or divided between extensive mountain ranges. The nation might be vast, but its fertile land is concentrated on its coasts and riverlands. The Empire of Man is the largest human nation in the Old World at least, and maybe rivals Cathay, but has much more favorable geography. It's covered in farmlands and forests, with smaller, less divisive mountain ranges. The only blight in the Empire is Sylvania, which represents a smaller fraction of its territory. But it's Bretonnia, I think, that's the clear winner here. It may not be the largest human nation, although it does rival the Empire, but it has by far the most usable land. For the most part, its geography is very similar to that of its northern neighbor, with 2 notable improvements. It has better access to the Great Ocean, for most of the Empire's ports are upriver or frozen in winter. Bretonnia also has, just generally, a much more pleasant climate. perfect for growing vineyards and making wine. But if Bretonnia is the clear winner, Kislev is unfortunately the loser. Most of their territory is inhospitable, even in the best of times, and a frozen wasteland in the winter. Every major port is likewise inaccessible for a large part of the year. So based on all this, I'm classifying the geography of Bretonnia at high, Cathay and the Empire at middling, bordering on high, and Kislev at low. Now the economy. And here is where the Empire of Man really shines. In fact, I believe it's just on the verge of an industrial revolution. It's beginning to transition from hand production methods to machines, possesses steam power, and the beginnings of a mechanized factory system. It also wholly embraced the rise of the merchant class, which is dominating its nobility. The rest of the nations on our list are stuck at some level of feudalism. Bretonnia is probably at the bottom of the list. Its economy is locked in a strict class system with very few methods of creating capital. Kislev is only slightly better. Its cities are very wealthy, but the remainder of the country is incredibly poor. Cathay is tough. In terms of raw production, it probably equals or outstrips the Empire, but that's only because of its immense population. Regardless of how much it produces, the methods involved are very rudimentary. I'm going to classify the Empire as high, bordering on dominant, Cathay at middling, and Kislev and Bretonnia at low. So, government. I think the expectation here might be that Cathay again would be dominant. After all, its ruling emperor and nobility are immortal, benevolent dragons, which depending on your outlook might have disqualified it from this list of human nations altogether. But the propaganda of Cathay has nothing but good things to say about these dragons, but I don't buy it. For all their supposed wisdom, they have proven to be no better able at avoiding civil war among themselves than their human counterparts. And when we look at the advantages Cathay possesses, how many of these were the direct result of good governance versus pure luck or its inherent geopolitical position? The Empire of Man is maybe a bit weaker in this field. It's really a collection of electoral provinces, and getting each elector count to work together can be difficult or even impossible. Karl Franz seems capable, but there's no guarantee his replacement will be as good or even remotely competent. That said, when the electoral provinces do work together, their total power is probably the greatest in the world. It's ultimately, though, all dependent on the effectiveness of the Emperor. Bretonnia is again likely the weakest of the bunch, still using an anachronistic feudal system that's long since been replaced everywhere else. Kislev, though, might be unusually strong here. The powers afforded to the Tsar are not bound to any meaningful constitution or legislature, so the office might be the single most powerful in the world, maybe equaling that of Cathay's Dragon Emperor. Of course, just as with the Empire, there's the risk that you might get an incompetent Tsar who would ruin Kislev. But given that the land itself seems to have some sort of influence on its most recent Tsarina, I'm inclined to believe that this risk is a bit reduced in Kislev, at least in recent generations. So I'm going to put Kislev at high, Cathay at high or middling depending on how involved the Emperor decides to be in that moment, the Empire of Man at middling or high, and Bretonnia at low. That takes us to military power, and I think our first real controversial choice so far. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Kislev's army is the most effective in the known world. It's not the largest or the most advanced, but it has successfully resisted more invasions than probably any other power. It's constantly at war. Its regiments are made entirely out of seasoned veterans. There's basically no such thing as a raw recruit when you live on the border with the realm of chaos. If tough lands breed tough people, then no one is tougher than the Kislevites. What's truly astonishing, though, is that while Cathay is in the same position, bordering the realms of chaos, they've needed to build a gigantic wall to resist northern incursions, and that hasn't always succeeded, while Kislev accomplishes the same result with nothing but its armies, discipline, and tactics. And not to mention a fraction of the resources. That said, Cathay's war machines are very impressive, especially the Terracotta Sentinels and the Sky Fleet, although the army as a whole is not used to aggressive campaigns. The Empire of Man is also up there, mostly due to the sophistication of its arms, particularly its artillery, although the quality of its armies can vary wildly from province to province. Bretonnia probably comes in last here, antiquated armies in the same manner as its economy and government. But the military strength of a nation also includes that nation's allies, and the Western powers are definitely ahead of Cathay here. The Empire of Man, Kislev, Bretonnia, they all have strong ties with one another and the neighboring Dwarven kingdoms. In times of great peril, they can also count on the High Elves and maybe even the Wood Elves. Cathay, meanwhile, is entirely without any meaningful allies so far as I'm aware. The Empire of Man and Kislev both score a high, while Bretonnia and Cathay are left at middling. Like I said, this might be a controversial choice. Now we end things with culture. And I should specify here that what I'm really talking about is soft power. How effective are these nations at coercing others through appeal and attraction? I think the Empire of Man is unchallenged here. Its religion, particularly the cult of Sigmar, has spread everywhere throughout the Old World, and even smaller cults like the cult of Ulrich are pretty well known. The Empire is often seen across the Old World as the leader in the fight against chaos, and many other smaller nations in the Border Princes and elsewhere emulate its example. The religions of Kislev and Bretonnia, meanwhile, are linked closely with their land, so it doesn't have much appeal to people outside its borders. That said, they are heavily involved in trade, so some measure of soft power is expressed that way. Cathay is in a similar spot, but for a different reason. Its rulers are very isolationist and don't even try to export its culture. So I'm thinking the Empire is dominant, Kislev and Bretonnia are at middling, and Cathay is at low. To be clear, I'm not saying its culture is inferior, it's just not well known among other nations and thus less appealing. Now we arrive at the final rankings. In my opinion, of the big four, Bretonnia is the weakest, largely due to its outdated institutions. Its saving graces are its favorable geography and powerful allies. Kislev is in third place due to its experienced military and strong centralized authority. Cathay is in second place, saddled by isolationism and a government that doesn't really reflect its citizenry. And the most powerful human nation in the Warhammer world is the Empire of Man, due to its sophisticated economy, effective military, favorable geography, but most importantly, the worldwide appeal of the Imperial system and the God King Sigmar. But that, of course, is just my opinion. And even though these rankings were divinely inspired, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you disagree with my rankings? Are there other important factors I didn't include? How would you rank each nation in these categories? Let me know in the comments below, and until next time, this has been Incoming. In Incoming, the Templin Institute discusses the theories and ideas found across alternate worlds. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to join the Templin Institute, consider pledging to our Patreon page. Along with increased security access, you'll be able to vote in polls to determine future topics, get custom wallpaper every week, and receive some other exclusive rewards.